It is Green Bay's oldest cold case, the killing of Lisa Holstead. She was 22 years old when her body was found in August of '86. Authorities say she had been strangled.
On August 12, 1986, Lisa Holstead's boyfriend reported her missing. He hadn't seen or heard from her for the last 12 hours after arguing with her the night before. Just an hour after authorities began searching for her, 22-year-old Lisa Holstead was found strangled to death in a marsh in what's today the Ken Ewers Nature Park in Green Bay, Wisconsin. For over 3 decades, the mystery of who killed her baffled police. Who could have killed Lisa so brutally and disposed of her body in this manner? What was their motive for killing her? Welcome back to Mysterious 7, where we shed light on under-the-radar cases across the country. Today, we'll be looking at how the oldest cold case murder investigation in Green Bay was solved after 34 years. But first, if you still haven't subscribed to our channel, please don't forget to like, subscribe, and click the bell icon below. Let's dive right into this mystery without any further ado. Green Bay is a city in Wisconsin. It's the county seat of Brown County and is found at the mouth of Fox River and on Lake Michigan. It has a population of over 105,000 people and is the 3rd largest city in the state of Wisconsin. The Meyer Theater is one of the historic cultural attractions that it boasts. Its football team, the Green Bay Packers, is what the city's most well known for. This is where our case takes us today. Let's go back to where it all started. Lisa Holstead was born on April 18, 1964, in Southampton, a small town in Suffolk County in the state of New York. She was raised by her single mother, Judith Karen Thompson. Her father, Frank Holstead, was not involved in her life at all. She grew up with her sister Deborah, who was 3 years older than her. Though they didn't have much, Judith worked hard to provide for her 2 girls, and she loved them both dearly. Lisa enjoyed horseback riding and sketching in her spare time. At the young age of 17, Lisa got pregnant and ended up having a son who she named Jeremy. She loved him very much, and like her own mother, she raised him on her own, as the father did not want to help her in any way. Wanting her independence, she also made the tough decision to move away from her family in New York and lived in Los Angeles for a few years before shifting to the town of Green Bay in Wisconsin with Jeremy. There are no records indicating that Lisa ever went to college. She did, however, take a goal-oriented, non-credit adult learning course at the Northeastern Wisconsin Technical Institute between 1983 and 1984, once she'd moved back to Green Bay. In 1986, Lisa was 22 years old and Jeremy was 5. They'd established themselves in the city of Green Bay. Lisa had even begun to date again and had a boyfriend named John Sott, of whom she was very fond. He'd moved in with her and they were very happy together. They had a pet eel and a pet bird named Herbie. Lisa and John loved spending time with Jeremy and would often take him fishing. Once he was asleep at night, the 2 of them also enjoyed going to local taverns and playing darts, leaving Jeremy at home, usually in the care of a sitter. Life seemed to be going well for her, and she was hopeful for what the future could hold. Sadly, this was not a future she would live to see. August 12, 1986 was a regular Tuesday in Wisconsin, but for John Sott, it was a terrible morning. He and Lisa had gone out drinking the previous night and had gone to a couple of bars and played darts late into the night. When they were driving back home, they got into an argument. They were both a bit intoxicated, and Lisa decided to get out of the car at the intersection of Mason and Taylor Streets at around 2:30 a.m. John returned to their home, expecting that she'd come back on her own once she'd cooled down. But in the morning, when she still hadn't returned, he began to worry. He went out to search for her, but when he found no trace of her anywhere, he decided to report her missing to the police. Within an hour of him reporting her missing, she was found by 2 workers in a marsh near the west shore of the bay in the Bayport Industrial Park. Her body had been cruelly disposed of, likely because the killer hoped it would never be discovered in the marsh. Police were called, and detectives arrived soon after. When the officers from the Green Bay Police Department, GBPD, arrived, they examined the body in the crime scene. Marks on her neck showed that she'd been strangled to death, and the case was ruled as a homicide. The body was sent for an autopsy as the police began to conduct interviews with people in the area to try to find out if anyone had any reason to kill Lisa. Her boyfriend and family were informed of her death, and they were devastated at the news. Police took casts of tire tracks and footprints that they found at the crime scene in hopes that it might lead to something. When the results of the autopsy came back, it showed that Lisa's blood alcohol content was 0.25% the night she was killed, more than twice the legal limit at the time. The autopsy also found that she'd been sexually assaulted before she was killed. Police theorized that this was likely the motive behind the murder. They were also able to extract DNA of the person who had assaulted her, but at the time, unless they were able to test it directly against a suspect, that evidence was basically useless. However, the DNA was stored in the hopes that it would be useful later in the investigation. Police looked into possible suspects and interrogated known sexual offenders in the area, but no fresh leads turned up. Eventually, with nothing to follow up on, the case went cold. For over 3 decades, the case remained cold, with no new updates in terms of suspects or leads. But finally, in 2020, the investigation was reopened. Detective David Graff from the GBPD led the investigation, and he began looking into the case to try and find out who the killer could be. They went through old case files and reviewed all the evidence from the initial investigation. When they saw the DNA that had been stored, they knew it held the key to cracking the case. They decided to use genetic genealogy to try and find out who the killer could be. Genetic genealogy creates family history profiles by using DNA test results in combination with traditional genealogical methods. It can be used to find the closest relatives to individuals whose DNA profiles cannot be identified as they're not in the system. When the DNA was sent for analysis, it came back with a lot of information regarding the man's heritage, which set police on a path to finding a new suspect. They were able to identify some distant relatives of the individual whose DNA had been tested, and they built a number of family trees to help them find the culprit. They found groups of people through databases and websites who might be relatives. They found a group of people who lived in other states, which eventually led them to relatives in Wisconsin, and ultimately to a family member who lived in Green Bay in 1986. This man's name was Lou Griffin, and in 1986, he'd been released from prison a month before the murder and had just moved to Green Bay at the time. He'd been in prison for another case of sexual assault in 1981. During the initial investigation, he'd not been on the police's radar at all, as they did not know he was in Green Bay at the time. Now that they had a suspect, they needed to test his DNA against the profile they had to be sure if he was their man. So police tracked down now 65-year-old Griffin's location and found that he was living in Racine, another town in Wisconsin. They tailed him for a while, and one day they saw him disposing of some beer cans in a dumpster, as well as throwing a cigarette butt on the ground. These were collected and used to test for his DNA, and when the results came back, they were a perfect match. After over 3 decades, the police finally had their man. On October 28, 2020, at around 6 a.m., Griffin was arrested by police outside his home in Racine and taken to the Brown County Jail. When he was interrogated by the police, he initially denied having any involvement in the murder, but then he eventually admitted to having sex with her. He then told police that on the night of the murder in 1986, he'd been high on cocaine and drunk on alcohol, so he was unsure of what he did. He did mention that he drove home on a route that passed the location where the body was found. He was booked on a first-degree homicide charge, and his bail was set at $1 million. When the case went to trial on January 27, 2023, Lou Griffin reached a plea deal with the prosecutors. Griffin pleaded no contest to a charge of homicide by reckless conduct. The court found him guilty of the crime, and he was charged with first-degree intentional homicide. The sentencing hearing is set for March 27th. After the killer was caught, Jeremy, who was only 5 when his mother was taken from him, spoke to the press. Now 39, He said that he was grateful to the efforts of the detectives who had worked so hard to find the suspect after all this time. He also mourned the fact that his grandmother and aunt did not live long enough to see the man who took their beloved Lisa away from them. Lisa's sister Deborah had passed away in 2003, and her mother had died just a year before the killer was caught in 2019. I just wanted closure. It's the same thing the whole family has wanted for the last 34 years. I just wish my grandma was alive to be able to see this, Jeremy was quoted saying.
Just closure. Same thing the whole family wanted for the last 34 years. It's just my grandma was still alive, to be able to see this.
We are glad that even though it took so long, Jeremy finally had the closure he needed, and we hope that wherever Lisa is, she's resting peacefully, knowing the man who took her life will now face justice for the atrocity he committed. This case serves as an example of the potential of modern forensic technology to solve cases which were long considered hopeless. But what do you think of the case? What sentence do you think Griffin deserves for his crime? Let us know your thoughts in the comments down below. And if you enjoyed the video, like, share, and subscribe to the channel. Until next time, stay safe and thanks for watching.